Imagine waking up one day in a silent house. There's no soft breathing next to you, no clinking of mugs in the kitchen. The bed is wide, the silence wider. Outside, the world moves, swells, pulses with couples holding hands, dinner reservations for two, anniversaries marked in rose gold and framed photographs. But you live alone. And not just for a season. You chose this. Not because no one wanted you. Not because life passed you by. But because, at some point, consciously or unconsciously, you realized that solitude was not an absence of something, but the presence of yourself. But here's the paradox. How can a woman live completely alone in a world that tells her again and again, subtly and overtly, that her worth is tethered to how well she's loved by a man? Society doesn't whisper this. It screams it. In lullabies sung to baby girls, in fairy tales where the heroine's happiness hinges on a prince, in the gaze of family dinners where relatives shift uncomfortably if you're still unattached at 35, in wellness blogs masked as empowerment, asking, "Are you sure you're not just avoiding intimacy?" As if choosing oneself was a failure, as if silence was a curse, as if a woman alone must, by definition, be broken. So tell me, how do you explain the strange power you feel when you pour yourself wine at midnight with no one to impress? When you dance in your living room with no eyes watching, no hand to pull you closer, no voice saying, "That's enough"? What if solitude isn't lack at all, but a different kind of fullness? What if women who live alone are not lonely, but liberated? Now pause. Think, where does that discomfort come from? That uneasy sense in your gut? Is it your own? Or is it a residue of centuries of conditioning? Carl Jung once wrote that loneliness does not come from having no people about one, but from being unable to communicate the things that seem important. So ask yourself, what if women who live alone are not disconnected from others, but from a society that cannot comprehend a woman who doesn't need to be needed? What does it say about a culture when a man living alone is seen as focused, driven, ambitious, but a woman alone is seen as pitiable, frozen in some tragic snow globe of mischances? Here lies the deeper question. The great question, is a woman still considered whole if she is no one's other half? Why does that rattle something inside you? Could it be that we have inherited an identity as women that has always required an external mirror to prove our existence? Could it be that we don't fear being alone, but being invisible? And yet, here she stands, the woman who lives alone. Not by accident, but by radical choice. She cooks for one, travels solo, celebrates birthdays in candlelight without shared cake. She is not a waiting room. She is not a pause story. She is the story. So then, what are we really afraid of? That if too many women choose this life, unapologetic, unsupervised, unburdened, the whole architecture of gender dependence might finally crack? And if it does, what remains? Who does a woman become when she is no longer someone's wife, someone's mother, someone's dream? When she is no longer defined by how lovable she is, but how deeply she has loved her own company? This is not a meditation on loneliness. This is a confrontation with freedom. And freedom, as Nietzsche warned, is not for the faint of heart. To live alone is to defy the very metrics by which womanhood has been measured for centuries. It is to say, I am enough, even if the world doesn't understand what that means. It is to choose presence over performance. It is to walk through the void of silence and discover, not emptiness, but depth. And so we return to the unsettling question, what is the cost of being a woman who lives alone? And what is the cost of never finding out? Let's go deeper, because the roots of this unease lie far beneath modern dating culture or generational values. They twist through the bedrock of psychology, ancient archetypes, and unconscious fears we've barely begun to confront. This isn't just about solitude. It's about identity. It's about inherited myths. And it's about the silent rebellion taking place in every woman who dares to ask, what if I was never broken to begin with? Look closely. The unease surrounding a woman living alone is not a modern discomfort. It is ancient, older than language, older than civilization. It lives in myth and dream, in the shadows Jung called the collective unconscious, a space where archetypes, the mother, the lover, the maiden, the crone, sleep and wake within us, shaping who we believe we're supposed to become. For centuries, the feminine psyche has been carved into pre-written roles. The nurturer, the seductress, the martyr, never the sovereign. To choose a life outside of those roles is not just to defy expectation. It is to awaken a kind of ancestral anxiety in others. You're not only stepping out of a narrative, you are threatening the very need for that narrative. Jung understood that every soul is on a journey toward individuation, the process of becoming one's true self, unbound by ego or mask. But individuation requires confrontation with the shadow, the repressed, rejected, and uncomfortable parts of ourselves. For women, the most repressed part has often been autonomy. The radical belief, I belong to no one. But here's the trap. From the time a girl is born, she is trained to outsource her identity, to be pretty for someone, to be kind for someone, to succeed so someone will choose her. What remains when all the for someones are gone? Schopenhauer once wrote that solitude is the fate of all great and noble spirits. But in women, we have pathologized this very solitude. We label it depression, bitterness, failure, not because it is pathological, but because it is powerful. A woman who no longer seeks external validation is no longer manageable. Philosophically, this reveals a darker truth. We have built an entire society on the fear of the autonomous feminine. Nietzsche warned that morality often disguises resentment, that virtues are often born from the powerless condemning what they cannot control. So we labeled the solitary woman as unnatural, selfish, cold, even dangerous. The witch alone in her cottage, the old maid haunting the edge of town, the spinster peering from her window. They weren't hated because they were evil. They were hated because they were free. And what is more terrifying than a woman who needs no permission to exist? But this fear isn't just cultural, it's neurological. Our brains, shaped by tribal evolution, are wired for belonging. Rejection from a group once meant death. To be alone was to be endangered. For women, this instinct was even more critical. Historically excluded from resources, property, and protection, survival did depend on attachment. But what happens when the evolutionary need for attachment lingers long after the structures that required it have vanished? A woman today can earn her own income, own land, build her own empire. But the ancient brain still whispers, you must be chosen. You must be kept. You must belong to someone. That voice is not yours. It is the echo of thousands of years of survival instinct, fossilized into a false truth. The philosopher Simone de Beauvoir saw this trap clearly. She wrote, "One is not born, but rather becomes a woman. That is, femininity is constructed, imposed, shaped by systems that benefit from a woman seeing herself as a role, rather than a being. To live alone, then, is not just a lifestyle. It is a deconstruction of femininity itself. You're not becoming a wife, not becoming a mother, not becoming a muse. You are becoming yourself. And yet, the psyche resists. Your own mind may become your jailer. Internalized scripts whisper, you'll grow old and regret this. No one will be there when you die. Love is what gives life meaning. These are not thoughts. These are inheritances. Psychologically, the woman who lives alone begins a slow and painful shedding, not just of people, but of illusions. Jung would call this the encounter with the anima and animus, the internal masculine and feminine energies within every person. When these forces are unbalanced, we project them outward. A woman with an unintegrated animus may seek her inner strength in the form of a man, never realizing the very power she admires is dormant within her. Living alone forces the integration of these polarities. You become your own protector, your own fire, your own stillness. You stop outsourcing your soul. But this process is agonizing because the ego dies slowly. And with every death of the ego, a new voice is born. Who am I without someone to tell me who I am? This is where the hidden problem crystallizes. It is not loneliness. It is not bitterness. It is identity collapse. And yet, this is precisely the threshold required for transformation. As Carl Jung warned, there is no coming to consciousness without pain. The pain you feel is not because you're broken. It is because you are waking up. The woman who lives alone walks a narrow path between freedom and fear. Each step strips away a lie. Each moment of silence dares her to face herself fully. And the world, in its confusion, watches and wonders, why would she choose this? But they are asking the wrong question. They should be asking, what does she know that we do not? At first glance, the woman who lives alone may appear untouched, serene, unbothered. The quiet around her is not hollow, but deliberate, like the stillness of a lake that hides untold depth. Yet beneath that composed surface, an invisible drama unfolds, not just within her, but within the world that surrounds her. Because a woman alone is not merely a private choice. She is a cultural mirror, and what she reflects can be unsettling, not because she's doing harm, but because she is exposing it. You see, our collective psyche was built on balance sheets. Social economies where men bought power and women traded proximity. Marriage, status, inheritance. None of these were designed as love stories. They were architectures of dependence. When a woman opts out, she doesn't just leave a man. She leaves the whole market. And the market panics. The consequences unfold subtly. In conversation, she is asked, "But don't you ever feel lonely?" As if loneliness is a problem to solve, rather than a human experience to feel. As if living with a man is an insurance policy against existential discomfort. In the workplace, she's often expected to work longer, absorb more, give more. You have no kids, no husband. What else are you doing? She becomes a resource to exploit, not a human being with boundaries. In family gatherings, her choices are questioned with gentle concern, veiled as kindness. You deserve someone wonderful. The unspoken clause is cruel, because without someone, you are incomplete. But what they cannot see, and what she herself must struggle to accept, is that she is not an anomaly. She is the future. Still, she pays a hidden tax. The tax of invisibility. Modern culture is obsessed with narratives. Streaming platforms flood us with stories of love, loss, reconnection. The single woman is either frantically swiping through dating apps, drinking wine in a bathtub with tears in her eyes, or finally finding the one who completes her. What we rarely see is a woman who simply is. No romance arc, no redemption through coupling. Just a woman living, becoming, expanding. She becomes unmarketable. And in a consumer world, to be unmarketable is to be erased. Even the algorithms don't know what to do with her. Ads show her fertility treatments, wrinkle creams, self-help books that promise to attract the right man. They never ask if she even wants one. This is no accident. Culture does not like what it cannot categorize. And a woman who lives alone is a category of one. Yet the most dangerous consequences are not external. They are internal. They happen in the quiet hours. At 2 a.m., when the city is sleeping and her mind opens doors it never dares in the daylight. What if I am wrong? What if love is the only real thing? What if I built a beautiful prison? These are not weaknesses. These are thresholds. But thresholds can become cages when shame seeps in. And society is skilled in weaponizing shame. You start to believe that maybe you have missed something. That maybe there's a deficiency. That maybe, just maybe, a woman without a man is like a sentence without a subject. This is the insidious nature of cultural conditioning. It does not scream. It whispers. In your movies, in your music, in the casual language of friends, you'll find someone. As if finding someone is the destination. As if being someone is not enough. Cognitive psychology tells us that repeated exposure creates belief. The mere exposure effect suggests that the more we hear an idea, the more we internalize it, even if it's wrong. So you start to ask questions you never used to ask. You doubt your own joy. You question your quiet. And this is where the real damage begins. Not because you are lonely, but because you're gaslit by a world that cannot imagine your wholeness. But there's another layer, a deeper, darker one. Women who live alone become existential threats to men who've never developed emotional self-reliance. They trigger unprocessed shadows in others. To the man who defines himself by how needed he is, a self-sufficient woman is terrifying. To the woman who traded her dreams for a role, the solitary woman is both a warning and a mirror. Carl Jung believed we project what we refuse to face, that those we resent often carry the parts of ourselves we've buried. So when a woman lives alone, joyfully, intentionally, she becomes a trigger, a walking contradiction, a quiet revolt, not because she is against love, but because she no longer bows to the altar of dependency. This rebellion doesn't scream, it radiates. And that radiation exposes the brittle scaffolding of so many lives built on fear, not freedom. But make no mistake, the solitary woman does feel the consequences. There are days when silence becomes heavy. There are nights when no one knocks on the door. There are decisions made alone, battles fought in solitude, griefs carried with no witness. But she learns to hold herself, and that, perhaps, is what terrifies the world most of all. A woman who knows she can survive herself. Because if enough women realize this, if enough women stop asking to be chosen, if enough women unlearn the idea that their value lies in being loved, then everything changes. Marriage changes. Motherhood changes. Power changes. The very structure of society must evolve. Because once you can no longer shame a woman for standing alone, you can no longer control her. And when you can no longer control her, you must face her. Or worse, you must face yourself. It doesn't start with fire. It starts with silence. Not the kind imposed from outside, but the kind that comes from within when a woman finally stops performing. There is no fanfare when the rebellion begins. No banners, no slogans, no manifesto, just a slow, deliberate decision. I will stop abandoning myself. This is the quiet revolution that reshapes everything. Because once you stop waiting for someone to choose you, once you stop needing permission to live fully, you begin to see how many parts of your identity were designed to make you small. You rebel not with fists, but with boundaries. You rebel not by shouting, but by refusing to explain yourself. You rebel by unlearning. You unlearn the smile you gave to diffuse male discomfort. You unlearn the apology you attach to your ambition. You unlearn the belief that love means sacrificing your essence. And in this unlearning, you begin to remember something ancient, something nearly lost to time: your sovereignty. This is not empowerment as sold in hashtags or marketing campaigns. This is not girl boss capitalism. This is not a curated feed of yoga poses and matcha lattes. This is soul-deep rebellion, a return to the self before the world named you. Carl Jung believed that each of us has a true self buried beneath the persona, the mask we wear to survive. Individuation, the process of becoming whole, requires shedding that mask. It is not glamorous. It is painful. It requires solitude. For the woman who lives alone, this solitude becomes fertile ground. It is in this space, this sacred aloneness, that she begins to ask forbidden questions. What if I no longer want to be soft for someone else's comfort? What if I do not fear growing old, but fear growing fake? What if the person I've been waiting for is me? The rebellion begins here. It is not about rejecting love. It is about redefining it. Real love, soul-aligned, transformative love, cannot bloom in the soil of self-abandonment. It cannot be born from desperation, from the hunger to be completed. Love, in its truest form, arrives not as rescue, but as recognition. But that kind of love only becomes visible after the rebellion. You must first unchain yourself from every narrative that taught you to measure your worth in someone else's eyes. Viktor Frankl, the Austrian psychologist and Holocaust survivor, wrote that when we're no longer able to change a situation, we are challenged to change ourselves. That is the essence of this rebellion. You stop trying to change the world's expectations. and you begin to dismantle the part of you that ever needed to meet them. You reclaim your rituals. You learn to cook not for a partner, but for nourishment. You walk not for distraction, but to feel your legs belong to you. You cry without shame. You laugh without an audience. You rest without guilt. These are small revolutions, and they matter because they signal to your psyche, I am enough. I'm whole. I am allowed. There is, however, a danger in this freedom. Not everyone will celebrate your return to yourself. Some will resent it. Some will try to pull you back into their orbit, not out of love, but out of fear. Your rebellion will trigger theirs. You will become the one who got away, not from a person, but from the narrative. People don't like when you abandon the story they still need to believe in. They will call you cold, too independent, too guarded. But here's the secret. You are not too anything. You are finally you. You're no longer the actor. You're the scriptwriter. You get to choose what love looks like, what your days look like, what your aging looks like, what your loneliness means and what it doesn't. And in time, if love does appear, not as a rescuer, but as an equal, you will greet it without shrinking. Because you have become a sanctuary, not a seeker. You will not collapse into someone else. You will meet them at the edge of your sovereignty. This is the deeper rebellion, not isolation, not rejection, but integration. A love that does not consume, but expands. A relationship that does not define, but witnesses. An intimacy that does not fill a void, but honors a fullness. And here's the paradox. You cannot find this love until you no longer need it. That's what no one tells you. The rebellion is not a battle against men, or relationships, or even tradition. It is a battle against the part of you that was trained to disappear. When you stop disappearing, when you take up space in your own life, you break the cycle. You become the woman your ancestors prayed for. The one who writes her own story. The one who speaks with her own voice. The one who says yes without fear and no without guilt. You become dangerous, not because you harm, but because you heal. And healed women are the most radical force on earth. So if you feel afraid in this solitude, good. It means you are close. It means the rebellion is working. You are not unraveling. You are becoming. And in that becoming, you are lighting a path not just for yourself, but for every woman still trapped in the story that says she needs to be chosen. The truth is, you were never waiting to be chosen. You were waiting to remember that you've been whole all along. There's a moment, quiet, almost imperceptible, when everything shifts. It doesn't happen with a declaration. There's no lightning bolt, no epiphany soaked in cinematic glory. It happens, perhaps, as you are brushing your teeth, as you water the plants, as you sit on your porch at dusk and realize, I do not miss anything I thought I would. You're not haunted by the dinners alone or the empty space in bed. You're not longing for the sound of someone else's keys in the door. You are not aching to be held. You are held by yourself. And it is in this soft moment that the final truth begins to dawn. You were never meant to be completed. You were meant to be discovered. All this time, you were taught that love would arrive like a rescue, that someone would see your worth, and then, finally, you'd believe it too. But the truth is far more dangerous and far more liberating. You are not half of anything. You are the whole, the fire and the container, the seeker and the found, the path and the destination. The world will not applaud this realization. It cannot, because it does not yet understand. A woman who no longer orbits another's approval becomes a black hole in the cultural psyche, something vast, unknowable, gravitational. She draws in projection, fear, awe, jealousy, curiosity, but she belongs to no one. This is the death of the old self, the self built to be loved, to be chosen, to be digestible. And in its place, a deeper self is born. Not perfect, not invincible, but real. You stop needing your life to be explained in terms of relationship milestones. You stop thinking in phrases like, when I find him, or once I'm settled. The phrase, I am becoming replaces, I am waiting. And that, right there, is the portal. This is what Carl Jung meant when he wrote that the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are, not to become what pleases others, not to become who is desired, but to become someone who is so deeply herself that nothing, not even love, can make her abandon it. That is the final revolution and the final peace. But here's what's even more surprising. You begin to see that being alone was never the destination. It was the pathway, a sacred crucible through which the false self is burned away. You see that solitude was not the end, but the beginning. That the woman who lives alone is not a static identity, but a spiritual rite of passage. And like all rites of passage, it leads not to isolation, but to integration. You begin to see others not as saviors, not as missing pieces, but as mirrors. You meet people from fullness, not hunger. You love from clarity, not fear. And that love, when it comes, is not based on need, but on recognition. You do not need them to fix you. You only need them to see you, because you're already whole. But the final truth runs even deeper. When you stand in this fullness, something extraordinary happens. You begin to give birth to the feminine that was exiled for centuries. Not the performative feminine, not the obedient one, not the pretty, passive, palatable one, but the wild one, the wise one, the one who remembers. You become the archetype that Jung knew was missing from the modern psyche. The integrated feminine, sovereign and self-sustained, both tender and terrifying. The kind of woman who walks into a room and bends its energy, not through dominance, but through presence. You stop apologizing for your solitude. You wear it like a crown, and suddenly the world feels different. You no longer fear being alone, because you're never truly alone. You carry a lineage inside you. Women who are burned, silenced, laughed at, erased. You are their voice. You are their future. And in this final realization, you become something else entirely. You become a permission slip, not just for other women, for men too. For anyone who has ever felt trapped by the roles they were told to play. Because when you live fully into yourself, you give others silent permission to do the same. You do not preach. You embody. You do not convince. You radiate. You do not chase. You stand still and draw the world to you. This is the sacred paradox. You chose to live alone, not to escape others, but to come home to yourself. And now, whether or not love comes, whether or not partnership arises, whether or not anyone else ever fully sees you, you have seen yourself. And that changes everything. There is no going back now. Not because you are bitter, not because you've closed your heart, but because your heart now knows its own shape, and it will never again try to fit into hands too small to hold it. So let the world wonder. Let them ask, why does she live alone? And let your life whisper the answer. Because I am finally with someone I trust. And it's me.